Welcome to Motor Development and Skill Learning, Chapter 7. Let's get started. So, development of manipulative skills. Come on, slides, let's go. All right. So, manipulative skills and model of constraints. What makes humans unique in performing manipulative skills will be answered, and what structural constraints contribute to this uniqueness, and how might these constraints change over lifespan? So, grasping. Prehension is the grasping of an object. Halvorsen proposed 10 phases of development in 1931, transition from power to precision, imposition of one task, one set of environmental conditions. Holstein in 82, object size and shape influences type of grasp. By 9 months, infants shape hand to match objects as they reach. So you have birth, there's no contact. 1 month, limited contact. 2 month, grasp with entire hand. At 3 months, you'll see them adjust the hand position. At 4 months, grasp with the thumb on top. And at 5 months, grasp with fingers only. All right, so using that same block, you see different grasping techniques that will happen throughout the lifespan. And again, this comes from Halvorsen's 1931 work. So how do you shape your hand to pick up the following? Pen, quarter, heavy book, bottle of water, crystal vase. You know, as an adult, you're going to have different grips for all these, and these are all things that you developed over time. That's why, you know, with little kids, sometimes you look at some, you're like, I don't know if I want them holding that, right? Because more than likely, they're probably going to drop it, okay? Body scaling and grasping. Grip movements are body scaled. Key is hand size relative to the object size. So again, depending on the type of ball, right? So if, you know, if I'm holding a baseball fits inside the palm of my hand really easily. Now, if I hand that same baseball to a 4-year-old, well, the baseball is much larger than their palm, right? They can't hold it with, like, almost curl their fingers around the ball. It's a little bit different, right? And again, more research is needed in infancy, and infancy research is always hard anyways. You know, it's difficult researching populations that can't express exactly what's going on. It's, you know, you completely observe it. And again, the individuality of every child plays into that, which makes it very difficult when we research infants. Ratio of hand size to object size is consistent for transition from using one hand to using 2 hands to pick up an object. What drives infants to transition from random arm movements to purposeful reaches? Again, it's, you know, it's one of those things that as they, you know, there's a lot of theories. You know, I kind of give, you know, like reading through this book and the motor learning things I've gone through, like this is sort of my take on things. You know, part of it is just the desire of the kid to reach for something, right? I mean, that plays into everything. Why do you learn things you want to learn? Because you want to. You know, part of it's you want to. Sometimes it's things you have to. Sometimes, you know, there's different levels of interest. You know, kids also gain confidence as they try things, just like we do as an adult. You know, as we see a little bit of success in something, we try a little bit more, do a little bit more. So again, all those things will play into why it becomes more purposeful. Does learning to reach involve learning to visually match hand and object, or learning to control the arm? Yes and no, right? You know, there's, you know, you can reach in the dark for a cup or like a coffee mug or something, right? So it could be completely dark. You're going to go with a wide grip. As soon as you feel it, you're going to start adjusting for what that object is. So yes, vision, you know, vision's not important in that situation, but when you do visually see something and you reach, you use this different grasp because you can see what you're reaching for, whether it's a cell phone, it's a coffee mug. You know, I'm looking on my desk, you know, it's a stapler, it's a guitar pick, it's a pen. We have different reaching and grasping, right? So infants are good at reaching in the dark, so matching vision of the hand and arm with feel of the movement is likely not part of their learning, right? So again, this, we as adults, or those that, have our vision as adults, are much more inclined to use vision as a big piece of what we're doing when we're reaching for something. Infants are more likely to learn to control their arms by doing so. It's repeated reaching for objects. Again, and again, that's usually how we learn a lot of physical skills, right? Repetition. And infants align their gaze to where they reach. So they map vision onto their arm movement. So what this theory is they reach and then they start to, once they're doing this repetitive reaching and grasping of something, now they're bringing vision into it as a secondary response, I guess is kind of how this book puts it a little bit. At 3 to 4 months, infants become consistent in moving the hand to the mouth. By 5 months, they open the mouth in anticipation of the hand's arrival, right? So they're starting to learn, like, hey, here it comes, right? So if they have food and they're, they know the food's coming into the mouth. By manual reaching and manipulation, at 2 months, infants show bilateral arm extension and reaching. So this, like this, where mom and dad get so excited. Oh, look, they want me to pick them up, where you hold a ball out in front of them and both arms come up to grab it. Around 4.5 months, infants reach for objects with both arms. Usually one hand reaches and grasps object first. During year 1, infants alternate between predominantly unimanual and predominantly bimanual reaching. By 12 months, we see pulling apart and insertion action. Early in year 2, infants use objects as tools. After 18 months, infants manipulate objects cooperatively with both hands, and by end of year 2, we see complementary activities. So again, you can kind of see how the development goes. And again, these are based on averages, right? Some kids are a little bit quicker at things, some are not. Some kids will skip certain steps and come back to them. It's just like with working with adults. They are little individuals and they don't all follow the same rules, right? By manual reaching and manipulation, what activities do you perform that require complementary use of your hands? What challenges would you face in completing these tasks with one wrist in a cast? I can tell you I've had multiple shoulder surgeries, and so I've had to do a lot of things with one arm. Buttoning shirts, buttoning pants, definitely is difficult. Tying your shoes is difficult. I'm trying to think of some of the other things that were bimanual things that you do on a daily basis. Yeah, I mean, those ones are the ones that I just remember the things that were hard to get used to doing. The most was getting clothes on, definitely. Yeah, and then I was, I had shoulder surgery on my dominant arm, so everything else that I usually do with one hand, I was having to do with my opposite hand. So yeah. Role of posture. Reaching improves when infants can maintain postural control. They don't have to try to use their arms as much for balance. By 4 months, infants can adjust their posture as they reach, so they learn to shift their balance and their weight. What postural constraints could serve as limiters to the rate of development? Again, if they don't have good, strong posture, they have trouble in different positions with balancing and stuff like that, well, they're not going to be able to reach for things, right? They're going to be using their arms more for balance or putting them on the floor to prop themselves up or holding on to something, right? Manual performance in adulthood. Manual performance declines after age 50. Movements are slowed, coordination scores decline. This is Karna Vaharanta, 96, Hughes, 97, strength declines, more individuals exceeded time thresholds, some loss in coordination of handwriting, accuracy maintained, especially in well-practiced tasks. Maybe that's why, most MD doctors are like older guys and girls, and most of them have horrible writing. Maybe at some point in their life they had good handwriting. Everybody says, oh, doctors have the worst handwriting. Who knows? Maybe it's that. Which I don't think so, because I am much younger than that, and my handwriting's been terrible from elementary school on till now. So just to let you know. Um, and again, you know, it's like everything else, a lot of loss in coordination with some things. You know, like, so if you write a lot, you know, part of it just maybe decline, part of it, you know, overuse sometimes will, you know, like can cause issues. And then again, in some skills, you just don't do them as much, right? So it's like if you do something too little or too much, that's going to happen along with age, right? Is going to accelerate it. Rapid aiming movements. Movements involve an initiation, acceleration to peak velocity, then a deceleration termination phase. Young adults tend to have symmetrical phases. Older adults move less far in the accelerated phase and thus have a longer deceleration phase. Right? It takes them longer to stop, so to speak, and they don't, yeah, so they don't do that whole acceleration, deceleration as well as a younger adult. Fundamental manipulative skills. Performer gains possession or control of an object. Catching is the most common of these. Catching, ideally objects are caught in the hands so they can be manipulated. Needing to intercept an object makes catching more difficult. So again, you know, it's one thing if someone throws something to you right where you want it to be. Now, again, like intercepting something that's on a different trajectory makes it more difficult, right? You know, any of you that have played football know that it's one thing when the quarterback's throwing the ball to you and the ball, you know, you have a good quarterback puts the ball where it needs to be for you to catch it based on where you're going. Those of you that play defensive back realize that because you're trying to come between the ball and the receiver, those balls a lot of times are a lot more difficult because you're catching the ball at a point at which it was not intended to be caught, you know, unless you're playing against a really terrible quarterback. So, you know, who sometimes some of these pro quarterbacks seem like they're throwing to the other team, right? Early catching, children initially position their arms and hands rigidly, sometimes trapping the ball against their chest. I see this with my 6-year-old. I'm trying to get him to use his hands, right? And I've seen this, you know, there's some guys that you see in the NFL that do stuff like that. And you're like, what are you doing, brother? Get them hands out, you know, catch the ball, you know, and it'll bounce off their chest pads. And you're like, what? You're a professional, right? And again, it's that they get so, I don't know. I don't know how you get to that point and you don't make 90% of your catches without trapping. You know, I get sometimes, you know, you'll kind of trap just because you get in a weird position or you weren't ready for the ball to cut, you know, like you come out of a cut and the ball's already there or something. I mean, get that. But man, there's some of these guys that do a lot of ball trapping, you know, like especially when they're going across the middle of the end zone and the quarterback chucks one. I mean, you know, and they'll try to let it hit them in the chest and hold it there rather than putting their hands out to absorb it and catch it. And I'm like, what are you doing? Right? Children sometimes turn their heads away or close their eyes. Again, because they don't have confidence in what's, you know, you know, too many times things bounce up in their face, right? So yeah, and again, it increases the likelihood that's going to happen. And then moderate level of catching performances are reached in mid-childhood. So beginning catch phase, again, I see this with my kids. My older daughters are more of hand catchers now. So, you know, depending on the size of the object. Proficient catching, hands give the ball to gradually absorb the force, right? Catcher moves from side to side or forward and back to intercept the ball, and fingers are pointed up for high balls and down for low balls, right? So you learn to hand placements depending on where the ball's coming in at, right? So you roll you're gonna, you know, supinate and pronate your wrists depending on where ball placement is. All right, so here's proficient catching, sort of. I don't know who drew this. It's kind of goofy, but we're imagining that person's catching with the hands. It still looks like they're popping it off their chest, but whatever. Developmental changes in catching, task and environment constraints greatly affect the difficulty of catching. Arm action, little response, hugging, scooping, right? You know, like you try to, as it hits, you try to hug it or you try to scoop it up. You know, those are movements from like one face to the next to where you get to the arms give as they catch things. Hands up, palms in, palms adjusted, So, um, it's talking about, like, you have your hands up in a stop, like this is, the first phase. Then you get the palms now, like rotate in, and then palms adjusted would be like what you think about when you show someone how to catch a football, right? You kind of make a diamond between your thumbs and your index fingers. Hands are still kind of up, they're still in, but now they have that like kind of inward, so that when it hits, they absorb it, right? Body actions, people, with little kids, you throw the ball, they stand there, right? As they learn that balls don't always come right exactly where they want it, they will make a last minute awkward adjustment. And then eventually they learn to anticipate where they see the trajectory of the ball, where they should be to be successful in catching. So again, there's ways to assess catching. For comparisons, task and environment constraints must be consistent. The number of catches in a set of attempts can be scored. Developmental sequence can provide information about the movement process. And developmental profile is a combination of developmental steps across body comp. So basically, the only way you can really score catching in this, the way they're putting it, is one, it's got to be consistently placed in the same place. The kid starts off in the same place and all those other things. You're not throwing, like making like a few good throws and some bad throws, and because you can't assess a bad throw, right? Unless you're looking at assessing a more advanced catcher, right? That's just because that'll be part of the nature. Can you just to get the ball, right? Consider various objects to catch and various tasks and environmental constraints for catching tasks. So, a big kickball versus a soccer ball versus a basketball versus a football versus a baseball, those are all different things. Catching a frisbee, the different objects that move at different speeds at different sizes. And so all those different things, some things are more difficult to catch. To me, frisbees tend to be more difficult than a ball. I don't know, and I don't know if everybody feels that way, and maybe it's just because I've spent less time catching frisbees over my life than I have catching, baseballs and footballs and basketballs and things like that, right? Um, you know, uh, Baseball, because of the amount of velocity somebody can put on it and everything else, and using a glove might be more difficult to somebody that's never really used a glove to catch a ball. I imagine same thing. I've never played lacrosse, so I don't know what it's like to try to catch a lacrosse in that little netted stick thing that they have. So again, I imagine that, for me, that'd be vastly more difficult, just because lack of doing it, where some of those guys and girls that do it, man, make that look so easy, right? Anticipation is involved in many manipulative tasks and in interception skills. Studies often involve coincidence anticipation tasks anticipating completion of movement to coincide with the arrival of the moving object, right? So when if you can anticipate and you anticipate correctly, you put yourself in a position for a higher percentage outcome of catching an object. Again, if your anticipation is incorrect, rather than just making adjustments and not anticipating, that can also play against you in certain aspects, certain times. So interception success is often related to ball size, speed, trajectory, and other task and environmental constraints. Performance is well developed by the teens, and why might studies on coincidence anticipation reflect the limits of perception more than real world catching skills? Again, it's hard to, when you're doing studies, you have to do things consistently, right? So it's like, okay, well, we're going to do these 4 type of catches, right? And again, you can randomize the different catches, like the ball's going to be high, low, whatever. But in real life, real world catching, there's usually opponents, right? And because, not only, like if you think about a wide receiver's got to deal with a defensive back, or they've got to deal with, like not only a cornerback, but, also like a safety or somebody else that might be harassing them. You have a quarterback who is trying to throw either over linemen, they got to get around linemen to make their throws. They're on the run, they're planted, depending, ball comes out at different trajectories, so on and so forth, right? That's real world. That's hard to do in lab type settings or experiment type settings, right? Perception action perspective. Two characteristics of the person environment system for catching involves constant patterns of change. Invariant stable patterns, expanding optical ray visual patterns that expand or constrict of the retina. And invariance and moving sideways was investigated through the constant bearing angle strategy. So again, if you want to do real world, you've got to have folks moving around. You throw the ball high, throw the ball low, throw the ball ahead of them, behind them, so on and so forth. Like if you're, again, football, I'm thinking football, so I'm going to stay with those examples. Throw nice spirals, throw some that are end over end. Yeah, so on and so forth, right? Have some right-handed quarterbacks, left-handed quarterbacks that spins the ball different, right? These are some of the questions. Do catchers intercept a moving ball by keeping a ratio based on an angle of gaze at or near zero? Do catchers keep the vertical optical acceleration, the OAC strategy of the ball close to zero? And some experimental evidence supports the OAC strategy. So, and again, it may depend on the person, right? It's crazy. I played baseball for years and years and years, and I can't remember when it was, but I had a coach one time realized I wasn't tracking the ball when I was hitting. I basically had an open gaze at the pitcher and the ball coming in, and I was anticipating where it was coming into my gaze, and I'd hit the ball, and I was actually a pretty good hitter. And when he realized I wasn't tracking the ball once you could see it in the pitcher's hands and tracking it to the bat, he started making me do that. Right. So, I mean, here's the thing. I wasn't watching myself hit the ball. I wasn't closing my eyes or anything like that. But I was basically almost like with a blank stare, just kind of seeing it come through a field of vision, not focusing on it and swinging sort of where I felt it was in that vision. Right. And I was keeping my eye more on the pitchers as this was going on. And I did this for several years beyond, and nobody had ever caught that. And I never really realized that I was a kid. And I think it might have been sometime in junior high, I had a coach said, watch the ball, watch the ball, which again, I would do when catching a ball, but it's just, I don't know, somehow there's a disconnect, right? And again, everybody's different, right? And so the way that they watch the ball come in and their field of vision and everything else. How do children learn to arrive at the right place? Perhaps children learn that the ratio is zero when they stand still and catch the ball. Eventually, they learn to move to keep the ratio at zero. Experience is important in learning to move to catch. I mean, not only important, I think it's paramount. You have to do it a lot to really get it down, right? I mean, this is why professional athletes even spend hours and hours practicing their craft. Parents, teachers, and coaches can manipulate information constraints during exploratory practice. And again, you got to be careful with that. So, I'm saying that, and some parents all right, yeah, I'm going to make my kid the next, Jerry Rice or something. There's trying to vary things up is one thing, but make sure that they're at the developmental readiness to start adding more variance in there. Because again, if you make it too difficult, one, they'll be frustrated, you'll be frustrated, and two, it can sometimes set them back further rather than move them forward. And identify important sources of information might also help novice adults. Again, two-hand catching of the ball tossed underhand to a child's chest area. Again, 3 performance criteria they look for. Hands are in front with elbows flexed, arms extend to reach for the ball as it arrives, and balls caught by hands only, right? They're not trapping it. In older adults, little research is available. People just don't care. It's one of those things at that time. We're always looking at how do we develop the kids, and then when they get old, we're like, well, their stuff's on decline. They already had their time doing it. There's not much in the effect of research-wise in older adults in catching, right? Nobody's really worried about whether or not grandma can catch a soccer ball. Again, it'd be really interesting research. Catching might be influenced by factors affecting movement speed or ability to reach. Older adults are somewhat less accurate and more variable or coincidence anticipation tasks. But again, older adults can improve with practice. That's the thing. We always tell folks, it doesn't matter when you start working out, you can always get in better shape, right? It's the same thing with this. Any skills you practice, even when you're older, will make you better, whatever that is. Driving and piloting. What changing structural constraints might affect performance by older adults who drive cars or pilot boats or planes? What task and environment constraints could prove challenging to older adults? And what compensatory strategies could be used by older adults to offset these challenges? Again, you got to think about, what's there. And again, each individual's different, right? So some older adults, have a lot more visual and physical abilities than others. And so you have to take them on a case by case basis, right? So to end, manipulative skills set humans apart. Infants become skilled at reaching and grasping. Children are accomplished catchers by 11 or 12 years of age, but catching tasks that require movement to a different spot are difficult, and aging probably affects getting to a ball more than it affects manipulative aspects of catching. All right, that's it. If you guys have any questions, let me know. Again, chapter 7, and that's all we got for today. If I can get out of this, we'll end the recording.